Hello and welcome to the Providence College Podcast. I'm your host, Liz Kay, and I'm joined by producer Chris Judge of the class of 2005. Here on the Providence College Podcast, we bring you interesting stories from the Fryer family. This week, we're talking with Tim Hassett-Salley, a member of the class of 1981. Tim works in the workers' compensation and disability management industry. He majored in both psychology and music at PC and has found ways to explore both interests as a student and as an adult. He recently published a novel, Strike Two, You're Out, and composed a song that accompanies it. Tim, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your interest in music? What instruments do you play, and when did you get started?
Well, that's a great question. I did start 50 years ago as a drummer in a regular elementary school band, and took private lessons and considered myself a drummer, not a musician. So that's a little drummer joke. But I did start taking guitar lessons when I was in high school, but it wasn't until kind of midway through my freshman year at PC that I even entertained the idea of majoring in music. Sister Gail Himrod came to me and asked me if I'd consider becoming a music major. I was a psychology major because my ultimate goal in life was to become a psychotherapist. And as I said, I didn't consider myself a musician, just a drummer. But she said, you can do it. And it was a really great experience. And so over the next 3 years, sophomore, junior, senior, I had to take enough classes to graduate with a music degree as well.
What music groups were you involved with on campus? Did if Sister Gail knew who you were probably pretty involved.
Yes, she did. So I played in the orchestra, which we called the Wind Ensemble. I played in the pep band for all the basketball and hockey games, and I played in the jazz band. In addition to that, over the course of my 4 years at PC, I played a lot of music theater, and we did about one musical a year, and got to play with some really neat people, both in the musician side as well as the acting side, and that was a great experience. And I was able to, after graduating, carry that out and played quite a bit of musical theater in my after college life.
And it sounds like you kind of spanned lots of genres of music too. You were playing classical and orchestral music all the way to jazz band, pep band.
That's right. That's right. Well, we had in the orchestra it was a lot of marches and some classical music, and then in the jazz band, J.J. Swoboda was our band director, and he was a guy right out of the 40s era, and he was big band. And so we played big band music, and that was a great training and a great exposure to music that I might have heard on my father's radio, but I'd never played before. Then, of course, the same songs that they play at PC basketball games today were songs we played back then.
So the Saints go marching in. If we put you behind the drums, you could do
it. yeah, 7 or 8 times a game. So yeah, all the same. When I go to games now, I in fact a couple times I went down and sat in with the band while they were playing, and they let me play a couple of songs, and then till the ushers kicked me out. So.
I'm curious about your inspiration or motivation to become a psychotherapist. You sounded pretty certain in that aspiration.
Oh, I knew from 6th grade on that I wanted to be a psychologist or psychotherapist. And at the time, there was a show on TV called The Bob Newhart Show, and Bob Newhart played a psychologist, and he was a funny psychologist. And I thought, this is a perfect job. And that's really from 6th grade on, I knew that's what I wanted to do. And it was interesting when we got to PC as psychology majors, the first week of school, they took all of us down to the cafeteria down in Alumni Hall basement and sat us down, and they asked for a show of hands and said, who here wants to get a job when you graduate from Providence College? And all the kids that stuck their hand up in the air, the professor said, okay, you folks should come with me now. And they left. He said, and then the other professor who was there said, okay, all of you who didn't put your hand up, who had no expectation of getting a job, we want you to stay as psychology majors, because they weren't training people with a bachelor's degree to work in the field of psychology. You were really being trained as a researcher. And if you really wanted to become a psychologist, you needed to go to graduate school. And I had that as my intention all along.
So it was a different kind of weed out question there.
Yes, it was a great way to do it, and I think they set the expectations right so that I didn't expect to get a job right after graduating.
Good to set the bar low. And then you definitely carried on and didn't stop with your undergraduate degree.
Correct. I went to graduate school and I ended up at Bridgewater State University and got my graduate degrees from there.
And so you've held a variety of different jobs in your career as a psychologist and lots of different directions. Can you tell us about some of the work you've done there?
Sure. So as a backdrop to a lot of the full-time jobs I had, I did start a private practice right out of graduate school. And I quickly became a specialist in the treatment of domestic violence. And so I worked with abusive and violent men. And there weren't very many men doing that and treating what we called the perpetrators. Most of the focus on domestic violence was to treat the victims, the women who were involved in domestic violence. And so there were only a few of us in Massachusetts, where I live, who were doing the treatment of the males. And so I was able to get quite a practice going, a lot of referrals, and I ran a man's counseling group as well as individual counseling sessions. And that kind of branched out to treatment of incest perpetrators as well, which is something I never thought would be within my comfort zone. But as you start to do things professionally, your comfort zone expands. And before I knew it, I was getting known as a specialist in that area as well. Some of that made it into my novel that I wrote. Quite a bit of the third part of the novel, especially, is kind of conglomerate experiences of my counseling career. So, it would be tough to make a living and retain your sanity with that clientele if you were doing counseling full time. And so I always had another full-time job with benefits and within the disability management field. And so, I guess it's been 40 years now in that field. With one brief outtake from that field, I ran a homeless shelter, a family homeless shelter, and for a short period of time. And that was an interesting experience as well. All my career has been involved with human resources, or human services, I should say.
I'm so curious if you could tell us more about your experience working with perpetrators of domestic violence and incest, because it's definitely not a community that gets a lot of sympathy, for certain. And I'm curious, what sorts of things do you think that people don't understand or wouldn't know about those individuals?
Well, I think at least a third of them, at least in my experience, at least a third of the perpetrators had seen violence in the home growing up. And not that that's an excuse, but it's certainly an explanation of some ingrained training that they had growing up of what their idea of family life should be like. And then there was quite a bit of alcohol and drug abuse involved with families that have domestic violence as well. Not saying which came first, but that poses an additional challenge to treatment. And then there were others that, because of societal education, they might have picked up that somehow thought that was an acceptable response to issues in their life, is to become violent or coercive. So it's a very interesting field. You're right; it doesn't get a lot of sympathy. Also, didn't get a lot of funding. One of my graduate programs was to develop a domestic violence prevention model, which required a hotline for men to call if they felt themselves getting stressed before the point of becoming abusive. And I had to not only set up the program, as part of my degree, I did the concept, but in reality, I actually put the plan in place and then had to staff it with volunteers because I couldn't pay them, and tried to get funding. There was a limited amount of funding. This is in the mid 1980s when this was all happening. There was a limited amount of funding anyway for domestic violence, and almost none of that was going for the treatment of the perpetrators, as it rightfully should be going to the treatment of the victims. And keeping in mind that a prevention program like that, the people that would be calling me, the men that would be calling me, would have to become aware of the service, and they were probably aware of the service only because they had been a violent offender already. So these would be repeat offenders that we were trying to stop from future violence. So again, there's already a victim in the picture at that time, and the funding predominantly went to treatment of the women who were victims of violence.
The goal was to prevent further people from becoming further victimized further. So it definitely sounds like it would be challenging, stressful work.
It is both, and it can also be rewarding. The success rate is probably not high, but when you are successful in helping somebody eliminate aberrant behaviors in their life, it can be very, very rewarding. As is most of the jobs I've done have been had a great potential for being rewarding, and working in a homeless shelter, for instance, is heartbreaking, but it can also be extremely rewarding, knowing that you've helped people get on. And I've had experiences where I've met people 10, 15, 20 years after they were in the shelter when I was a director there, and come up to me, and I didn't recognize them, but they recognized me, and they just wanted to thank me for what I had done to help them get on the right path. And they've been able to maintain safe, comfortable housing ever since for their family. So that's extremely rewarding.
Kind of a make your day kind of moment, right? When you encounter people that way.
Yeah.
I'm curious if there were experiences during your time at PC that helped you, whether you drew upon either classes or professors or other experiences that you drew upon in these moments when you were working with these different groups of people.
Well, I think, of course, there are. It would be hard to pinpoint them, because I think it's part of the culture there as far as helping others. There were people that helped me. I remember a woman from the class of 1980. I was a class of 81, so she was ahead of me, and I needed tutoring in Western Civ my freshman year. I just wasn't getting it. And Jane Gonzalez from New Bedford, she was a hockey cheerleader, and she's a great all-around person. But she tutored me and got me on the right path, and started me with some academic discipline that I was able to continue with throughout graduate school even. So that was great. There was another experience I remember. I was at PC during the blizzard of '78, and after the first day, it got pretty boring. There was nothing going on. We were literally snowed up to the tops of the front door of Door Hall, and kids were jumping out of the windows just for fun into the large snowbanks. I didn't want to do that. I always think of how would I have to explain that broken leg to my father. But anyway, we were pretty bored, and Dana's package store down the street had run out of beer. So what were we to do? So I and a couple of friends walked down to the Veterans Administration Hospital down off of Chalkstone Avenue. And there were no cars allowed, not that any of us had cars, but we walked down the hospital and we volunteered, and they gave us police coats, and they let us go out in these big, huge four-wheel drive vehicles to pick up doctors and drop off other ones at home, because National Guard wouldn't let anyone except emergency vehicles ride on the street. So here we were out really joyriding throughout the streets of Providence, and picking up doctors and dropping other ones off.
But with a good purpose.
Yeah, with a good purpose. And
you had a good purpose.
We came back, and they had hot showers and milk and things that we didn't have at PC that week. And it was a lot of fun. And it was rewarding because we were helping out instead of just hanging out. And I always try to, try to do things to help others, because there'll be a time that you probably need help yourself.
So when did you start writing fiction? And how did that become something?
Well, I've only written the one book, and I am actually working on my second one. But this book, Strike Two, You're Out, it took 6 years to write. So I published it in 2019. So it was really 2013. I'd started writing. I'd really formulate my ideas in my head as I'm walking my dogs, and but most of my writing took place on airplanes, because I have to fly from my business, and I fly a lot. And so instead of watching the TV from the seat in front of me, I take out the yellow pad and would start writing. And oftentimes I would know it was time to stop writing when my pen ran out of ink, or they said we're beginning our initial descent to the airport. So 6 years of really 5 years of writing, and 1 year of trying to move the pieces around and make them fit into a kind of cohesive story.
And it sounds like you really drew on your experience as a psychotherapist to develop the plot line and the story.
I did. So I drew on a lot of that. In one of the main characters in the book is a psychologist, coincidentally. But there's a lot of psychology throughout the book. There's the main character has what we would call today PTSD, but at the time that the story takes place, starting in the early 1970s, they didn't call it that. But the main character is in Vietnam for a short period of time and witnesses some very traumatic events, and carries that with him for the rest of his life. So there's a lot of psychology in the book. It's not a happy book. It's I'm told it's an interesting book, and it keeps people's attention, but it's not it's not a happy ending type of book. There's a lot of twists and turns, but I felt that where I was going with the writing, I didn't want to have life isn't always a sweet happy ending and everything working out, especially if you work with as a psychotherapist. It doesn't always have a happy ending. So I wanted to reflect more of a real life situation, and I think I accomplished that.
What do you think of the power of fiction to help people like learn some of these lessons? I mean, some of the things that you'd probably work through in psychotherapy.
Yeah, that's a great question, Liz, because I didn't set out to teach anybody any lessons. But I've had people who've read the book come up to me and say, I read your book and it meant, XYZ to me, or they'd say, it really highlighted something that I was going through, and I was really able to work through it based on what I was reading. And that just blew me away, because I had no idea that was going to happen or would even be possible. And so I don't know what my intention was to write it. It was just something inside me I wanted to get out, and mission accomplished. But it accomplished a greater mission of some people really took it to heart and related it to experiences in their own life that they felt this helped them work through.
It sounds like you've been able to kind of workshop your book or share it with some PC students and faculty. Can you tell us about that experience?
Sure. Well, I connected with Professor Isi Asundu in the English department at PC, and he had a fiction writers workshop class, and we talked a little bit, and he invited me to come present to the class and do a reading, and also to take their questions. And they were very, very well prepared, and they had all read excerpts of the book before I came, which made it good. There's a lot of foul language in the book, and honestly, that's sometimes how I talk, but more importantly, it's how the main character talked, and it would have been appropriate for the time. But that was the only request that EC made, was to try to find a passage that didn't have too much of foul language to read to the students. So, that was challenging, but I did. I read a very, very powerful part of the book. It elicited a lot of emotion, and he said one of the nicest things anyone said after we read that passage. The students were very, very moved and very emotional. And he said, "Well, I've told them already. If you're reading a book, a work of fiction, and it doesn't get you emotional, read a different book." So I thought that was really nice, a nice endorsement.
And an excellent advice, frankly. If what a gauge of whether a book is successful or not, right? If it doesn't transport you to another place or to make you feel.
And this sounds silly, but I mean, I wrote the book, and I've read it probably 5 times since I published it, and there's certain parts that still make me cry, even though it's purely fiction. But I'm really, get inside the mind of the character, and some of it can be really powerful. And I've had a couple people tell me that they had to stop at a certain point and put the book down for weeks until felt they were ready to pick it up again. And that's an extreme reaction. Most people got through the book pretty quickly, but some people it triggers strong emotions.
It's all such an interesting reaction, and I mean it's definitely hitting people for sure. I wondered, could you tell us a little bit about the song? And actually, I should ask, I mean, your interest in music, you alluded to this earlier, didn't stop in college. You continued to remain involved and continued to play. Tell us about some of your musical pursuits after you graduated.
Happy to. I happened to be in a music store one day in my local town here in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and I bumped into the owner of the store, Paul D'Angelo, and we were talking, and we just got talking, and he asked me, what my musical background was, and kind of who do you know, and I told him that my piano teacher was Rosalind Chua at Providence College. He said, "Oh my God." He said, "She was one of my classmates at New England Conservatory." And she's long since retired from PC, but she at one point was the top pianist in her entire country of her native birth. And she won a scholarship to come to the United States to attend the conservatory. And of course she stayed, and it was such a gift to have her at Providence College. I mean, that caliber of teacher and musicianship, it was just incredible. So when I met this music store owner, he said, so you're a pianist? I said, "No, I'm really not. I had to take piano as a part of my major, but I'm a drummer." He said, "Well, I'm doing a show, Fiddler on the Roof, and we need a drummer." I said, "Well, don't you think you should audition me first, instead of just giving me the job?" He said, "Anyone who was a student of Rosalind Chua, I know has what it takes to play in my group." So that started we're still friends to this day, but that started a string of shows that we played for many years, a lot of different professional shows, and I got paid for it, which was incredible. I mean, I didn't tell him at the time. I probably shouldn't tell him now. I would have done it for free, but I got paid for it. It was great to be making money doing something you love and playing music. And he also at one point made me a teacher at his music conservatory, and so I taught drums there, and that was also very rewarding. And continued to be active and play with neighbors who happen to be talented. And a couple years ago, we got involved with a trio, and we were playing out at different clubs before COVID hit, and it was a lot of fun. We're still getting paid, not getting paid much, but I wasn't doing it for the money. It was a lot of fun to be playing 50s and 60s rock and roll and rockabilly, and just having a lot of fun playing some blues. And I'll kind of relate this back to the song that I wrote for the book, which is called Two Lovebirds. And originally I wanted to use Whole Lotta Love, which is a Led Zeppelin tune in the book, because I thought it was perfect. If you read the lyrics to that song, it can be taken as a love poem, but if you also listen closely, it's pretty lewd. It's so much sexual innuendo, and there was a story in the book that I wrote that it took place at a church, so it needed to be able to pass as a love poem, but the second meaning was people would be able to see that it was really kind of a lewd sexual innuendo type of passage. But I couldn't get the rights to the song, to Whole Lotta Love from Led Zeppelin. They wouldn't give me the rights, and which I thought was really incredible, because they had pretty much plagiarized that from the old Willie Dixon tune, which I think is called "You Need Love." And if you look at the lyrics, they're almost identical. And I know Led Zeppelin ended up getting sued about that, but I just thought it was ironic that the band that kind of stole someone else's song wouldn't let me legitimately pay royalties for it. So anyway, I was in a bind. I wanted to get the book published. I couldn't find another song that had both love poem qualities, but also had sexual innuendo. So I wrote my own song, and it's called Two Lovebirds. And we play that in our group, which was really fun to have your own music played out publicly. It was just a lot of fun. It's probably my favorite part of the book, because it takes place, that part of the book takes place at a Baptist church where the pastor wanted the teenagers in the church to come up with a love poem that could be read out loud. So the main character writes this poem. He pretends he doesn't actually write the main character uses this song that was supposedly popular in the radio. In reality, I wrote the song, but in the book, it takes place that it was something that would be heard on the radio, and he took the music off, used it as poetry, and pulled the wool over everybody's eyes in front of the whole church congregation. I thought that was probably the most fun part of the book.
Well, it just seems like the book, it becomes now, as a result, with this corresponding song, like it, is showcasing all of your talents and abilities here, because you've got your writing, you've got your musical talents as well. And of course, you're drawing upon your experience from psychotherapy. So it's like, it's all neatly wrapped up. It's so lovely.
That's right. And it's funny, in November, I was recognized by Bridgewater State University, where I went to graduate school, with an award called the Dr. Adrian Tinsley Award. And it's given annually to someone who does something good in the arts. And I guess they must have felt that my book was artful, but it was, they acknowledged my involvement in music and I don't know if we call it literature, and music in writing this book, and gave me credit for artistic achievement. So that was really nice to be recognized.
Tim, thank you so much. It's been lovely chatting with you about your book. Can you tell us a little bit where to find the book if anyone is interested in reading it?
Well, if they're close to Providence, they can go to Providence College Library. It's available there for free. But if not, there's a couple of public libraries where it's available, but here and there. But really, the most direct way is to go on to Amazon and get it that way, or it's on Walmart.com, and look for it. Strike two, you're out. And it's also available on e-reader and Kindle. So I'm just thrilled that people have had a chance to read it, and the comments I've received have been so nice to read. And there's really only one person who's made a negative comment, and that was my father. He just couldn't get past the foul language because he didn't bring me up that way. So it was a little too much for him, but it's not a children's reader. It's for adults.
And I think your audience is pretty well warned now what to expect. So it won't be a surprise to anyone. I think we'll actually close out the podcast by playing the audio from that song from a live recording that you shared with us.
That would be great.
Subscribe to the Providence College podcast in all the usual places, including iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, and as well as your smart speaker. If you like what you hear, please review and share with others. Thanks for listening, and go Friars.
Love is like a birdie flying into your cage. Love's a little birdie flying into your cage. The old birdie's gone out, it's time to tune your page. Open up your shutters and your windows too. Open up your shutters and your windows too. And if I have to, baby, I'll come down your chimney too. I want you to open up your shutters and your windows too. And if you let me in, baby, I'll fly the cool with you. Cheek to cheek, give me a kiss, birdie. Let's go beak to beak. I wanna pick you, sweetie, till you beat, beat, beat. Let's build a nest together where we can stretch our legs. Let's build a nest together to stretch our wings and legs. Your feathers until I nest with your legs. Your front door is locked, your back door too. If I have to, baby, I'll come down your chimney too. Why don't you open up your shutters and your windows too? And if you let me in, baby, I'll find the cool with you. And if you let me in, baby, I'll find the cool with you. Fly the coop with you. Hey, all right. Tim Hassett-Salley, songwriter, book writer extraordinaire.
Right up here, right for Sally's books there.
And drummer. Sorry.